This is a Mother's Day story. We all know mothers have many different dimensions. We know about that nurturing, kind side, the kind that bakes us cookies or makes us chicken soup when we're sick. Today I'm going to be talking about another side to mothers. It's that fierce, protective side. The side that can make them sometimes a little bit scary. I'm going to be talking about an anecdote from my life and telling a story about a parent at the school where I'm a high school teacher. So an anecdote about my own mother and a story about a parent at school. My story begins 40 years ago. I was about 10 years old. I was living in a 2-story house, and we had an outdoor cat. That meant the cat ate outside too. We would just leave the kibble right in front of the house. However, raccoons started eating all the kibble. And so my parents put the food on the deck on the 2nd story, right in front of their bedroom, which meant the cat had to climb over the roof late at night, drop down onto the deck, eat the kibble, and then go back the way it came. However, the raccoons learned to do the same thing. I remember in my bedroom, just below my parents' bedroom, hearing my mother's feet hit the floor. She began to stomp and clap her hands and shout, "Ah, ah, ah," to try to drive these raccoons away. The thing was, they became bolder and bolder with each passing night. And one night, no amount of stomping or clapping or shouting would drive them away. She stood there with her hands on her hips, staring at them as they shamelessly ate every piece of kibble right in front of her. Now, this was back during the 70s. This is when crank calls were very, very popular. We would be sitting there at the dinner table, the phone would ring, and someone would ask my father or mother, "Is your refrigerator running?" And they would say, "Why, yes." And they would say, "Well, you better go run and catch it." It got so bad that my mother actually phoned the police to ask for advice. And what they told her was very interesting. You should find a loud whistle and blow it right into the phone, and it will be so unpleasant they will stop calling you. One night the phone rang at dinner time. I remember my mother answered it. "The 400 pizzas you ordered are now ready for pickup." She looked at my father. We didn't have a whistle, but we had a horn. It was the kind of horn you took to baseball games to cheer your team on, the San Francisco Giants. She looked at my father and she said, "Byron, blow the horn." And he aimed it right at the phone and he blew it and it worked. The crank calls stopped. Well, when no amount of stomping and clapping and shouting at the raccoons worked, she decided to deploy the horn. "Get the horn, Byron," she said to my father. I remember trying to imagine the scene as my mother's feet hit the floor. She began to stomp and clap, leading the charge with shouts, "Ah, ah," and my father in tow, the horn protruding past my mother like a spear in a Roman legion. And then the command from my mother, "Blow it, Byron, blow it." There was a sputtering prelude, and then 3 sonic blasts out onto the deck and into the night, out over Middle Ridge, Mill Valley, Marin County, and the raccoons were gone. That horn, 40 years later, sits right on my desk at home. And I've been seeing it every single day because I'm a teacher and I teach from home. Zoom class. I remember a year ago when I first opened up my first Zoom classroom. There were 20 brightly lit squares, my students smiling back at me, their names in the lower left-hand corner. I took attendance. Everyone was there. Everyone was accounted for. And I launched into my first Zoom lesson. However, about 10 minutes into the lesson, we had a mysterious visitor. Their camera wasn't on, so it was just a dark Zoom square. And right in the middle, in all capital letters, was the word CHUD, C-H-U-D. I stopped my lesson. "Can I help you?" I asked. But CHUD remained eerily silent. My students began to fire questions in the chat. "Who's CHUD? Maybe it's so-and-so." "No, I'm right here," were the answers. "Can you turn your camera on, CHUD?" I asked. But CHUD remained eerily silent. At this point, one of the students Googled CHUD. And the first thing that came up was a movie from the 70s by that name, CHUD. And it was an acronym for Cannibalistic Human-Eating Underground Dwellers. I've seen the trailer since. It features a woman walking down a dark street. "Is somebody there?" she asked. And this thing crawls out of a manhole, grabs her and drags her through the manhole down into the sewer and rips her to pieces. Well, this did nothing to dispel the growing suspicion. The thing that I had been warned about, that this may be a Zoom bomber. And so I pressed a button and removed CHUD from the classroom. The strange thing was CHUD kept coming back. CHUD came back that day and the next and the next, and I just began unceremoniously removing CHUD to the grateful cheers of my students. "CHUD denied, CHUD given the boot, CHUD flushed down the drain where he belongs." The creepy thing was how bad CHUD's connection was. When CHUD joined the class, there'd be a spinning wheel, and it would say joining. And when CHUD left, when I removed him, the wheel would spin, and it would say leaving meeting. It made me think he was zooming from some kind of mountaintop or something. "No, he's just zooming from West County," one of the students said, and they laughed and laughed. Another student said, "Mr. Brandon, maybe he really is zooming from the sewer." And nobody laughed. Well, things came to a head in my office hours. This is where students come in individually if they need help. And since it was the first week, I wasn't expecting anybody. I was reading a book, and when I looked up, twinkling shamelessly in my Zoom room was CHUD. Now, without an audience of students, I became much bolder. "All right, CHUD," I asked. "What is it that you want? What, are you some kind of bully? Are you some kind of weirdo, CHUD? Go on, get out of here, you jerk, and never come back." And I pushed remove. Now this, if this were a horror film, is where the music would begin to get heavier, more intense. This is the part of the horror story where the main character, who's been running through the woods, comes to a tree and realizes he or she has been going in circles. This is the part of the horror story where they hide in the closet only to find the killer is there in the closet with them. This is the part of the monster movie where the hero cuts off the head of the monster and two more grow back. It was because of this bad connection, because CHUD was leaving and joining. I've seen this happen since, but the ultimate effect was that shimmering menacingly now in my Zoom office hours were two CHUDs. There I was, staring at my computer screen like I was watching myself in a horror film, my Zoom square, with myself looking back with a look of helpless terror on my face, and flanking me, flickering fiercely like two predators about to bring me down and rip me to pieces, were CHUDs. My horror grew to the point where I started fumbling for the mouse. But I needed an object, some kind of weapon. I didn't feel safe. And fate would have it that my hand landed right on that spirit horn for the San Francisco Giants, the one my mother had made my father blow to drive the raccoons away. I pulled it open, locked it in place, and aimed it right at my computer screen. And with a sputtering prelude, I gave it a blow. And I did it. I blasted CHUD right out of my office hours, just like my parents had driven the raccoons off the deck. I caught my breath. My confidence was slowly returning that I could and had defend the sanctity of my classroom. However, my triumph was short-lived. Almost immediately, something new was in my office hours. The camera was on, and although the person was muted, I could tell they were extremely agitated. Their camera kept freezing on expressions of anger and fury. It was a lady, and she was wearing a plastic shower cap with a bathrobe. Her name in the lower left-hand corner was California Housing and Urban Development Office, which, as you might have guessed, is the proper expansion for CHUD. She became so agitated and angry, at one point she ripped her plastic cap off with no small amount of her own hair, from which dangled a plastic hair curler, and she chucked it right at her computer screen. Now, what had I done to make this woman so angry? And by extension, the California Housing and Urban Development Office. Oh, my horror had transformed to confusion, and now it was a disoriented panic, and I fumbled for the mouse. But, well, the horn was still in my hand, and that had been no use. And in my total panic, I went for the plug. I stood up and ripped the cord right out of the wall, ending my office hours, ending the Zoom call, cutting power to my computer completely. I wasn't going back on until someone cleared this up. The Dean of Students did. CHUD had been one of our students. They had the wrong link to the wrong humanities section. They had a terrible Wi-Fi connection. They were using the Zoom account of their father, who worked for the California Housing and Urban Development Office. Of course, because I had been removing this student, yelling at this student, and then blasting them with my horn, they had become increasingly anxious and distressed, at which point his mother had stepped in. Well, the dean cleared it all up. He was given the proper link to the proper section. Our IT people went over to their house and helped them with their Wi-Fi situation. And of course, I apologized profusely to the family, and they graciously accepted my apology. Now, more than a year later, when I open up my Zoom classroom, most of my students have their cameras off. They say, oh, my Wi-Fi connection's bad, but I know they're microwaving mac and cheese, or they're snuggling in their beds an extra half an hour. Oh, and most of them change their names to things like SpongeBob, anime characters. I have one young man who comes as the Grim Reaper with a skeleton icon in his Zoom box. Of course, we all know it's just Elijah. Thank goodness we're going back to in-person learning soon. About a month ago, I did a materials pickup. This is where families come and get packets of photocopies, ceramic tools, science lab kits to do experiments at home. My shift was from 3 to 6. And most of the students had already picked up their items. One science kit remained behind. I remember looking at the name. It struck a bell. It rang a bell. But the student wasn't in one of my humanities sections. I decided to wait a few minutes. And after about 10 minutes, a little white pickup truck came roaring up and skidded to a stop, and out jumped a woman who ran up to the desk, apologized for being late, and thanked me for waiting. A man called from the truck, "It's my fault, I just got off work." And that was when I read the side of the pickup truck, California Housing and Urban Development. "CHUD," I blurted. And then, of course, I used the proper name of the student. Now, the woman was beginning to put it together now, too. "Brandon," she said. And for a moment, there was a silent tension between us. After all, on Zoom, we had been monstrous to one another. But now, in person, in real life, we could see right past that. She laughed, much to my relief. She laughed, and I laughed, and she laughed some more. And our hands reached out, and I think if we had not been under social distancing guidelines, we probably would have given each other a friendly hug. Well, that hug and so many other good things will just have to wait a little bit longer. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "My son would have killed me if I didn't get this science kit for him." And I remember being surprised by that because of how formidable she had seemed in the Zoom room. But then I remembered my own mother and how fierce she was when she defended our house from raccoons, or her children from negligent soccer coaches or deranged teachers. Yes, this woman, her eyes smiling over her mask, was just like any other mother. This mother of CHUD would do anything to protect her children. There is a brief afterword to this story. The last time my parents used the horn to drive away the raccoons, they weren't actually raccoons at all. I remember hearing my mother's feet hit the ground above me. I remember hearing her stomping her feet, clapping her hands, shouting, "Ah, ah," and then her command, "Byron, blow the horn." And he did. I heard the horn. But the strange thing was, there was another blow of the horn, and another, and another, and my mother kept commanding, "Blow it again, Byron, blow it again." The next day, my mother recounted how she had seen a blurry shape right at the foot of their screen door. When my father had blown the horn at the blurry shape, it had shot up near the door handle. My mother said, "I thought it was trying to open the door. Raccoons have very dexterous little hands." My father, within inches of this thing, blew the horn over and over again. The blasts echoing out over Middle Ridge Mill Valley in the middle of the night. At first, the blurry shape had been struggling, but then after several blows, it ceased all movement and just hung there limply, suspended about 2 feet off the ground. No, it wasn't a raccoon at all. It was our cat. And by the time my parents unhooked its claws, which had been caught in the screen, it bolted away in total terror. They spent the entire next day searching for the cat. There were phone calls. My mother answered them. Yes, I'm sorry about that. We won't be using the horn at night anymore. The cat food was put back in the front of the house. And this is another dimension to mothers, the one I told you about, the nurturing, kind one. My mother, thereafter, every night would sit in front of the house, waiting sometimes late into the night for the cat to come. And only when it showed up would she pour out the kibble and sit with it until it had eaten every last piece.